Welcome back. We are joined by Liam now to talk about working with penetration testers as a developer. Liam is a former software developer who switched to the dark side and started pen testing many moons ago. Formerly a director at Assurance, Liam now runs the research and development program for the pen testers at CyberCX. Liam is enthusiastic about ducks, so please get all the duck emojis in now. Take it away, Liam.
Thank you. All right, welcome. Yeah, thanks for the intro. And all right, who am I? Talked about that a little bit before. My name's Liam. You can find me on Twitter. I am presenting to you from Wurundjeri land. I am the research and development director for the security testing and assurance practice, which is essentially the pen testers at CyberCX. And I'm also acting director of the AppSec team at the moment. And what are we talking about? Why are we here? Why am I here? Well, I like to think of myself as a professional. And for me, that doesn't necessarily mean wearing a suit and collar. It means actually caring about the outcomes of my work and the customer experiences for, when you're working as a pen tester consultant. I get frustrated when I see engagements not go as well as they could. I get frustrated when I see customers not getting value or spending too much money, really, because pen testing is expensive. Mario's talk earlier on AppSec, talked about how important budget and cost is in information security. Because let's be honest, we love security, but every dollar spent on security is a dollar that's not spent on adding a feature or making an app more accessible or something actually constructive. So what I'm hoping to achieve in this talk is to try and make things more efficient and avoid wasted effort. So just for a bit of context, if you're not familiar with it, this is the OWASP software assurance maturity model. Shout out to OWASP, who are another great community-run organization. They just released their latest version of the OWASP Top 10. So if you're keen about web security, go check that out. It's great. But the reason I'm mentioning this is just to point out that pen testing is a really small, it's an important part, but it's only a small part of the much bigger security puzzle. So I know some pen testers seem to think that pen testing is security and security is pen testing, but that's definitely not the case. And so if we think about developers and pen testers, we have different expertise, we have different experience, we have different backgrounds. I mean, everyone does. That can be said for everyone. And that's I was going to say that's okay, but that's more than okay. That's as it should be. People specialize in different things. And what I'm not trying to do with this talk is to turn developers into pen testers. What I'm trying to work on is that bit of overlap. So when we're working together, how can that part run more smoothly? And if it seems like the talk is a little bit one-sided where it's all about here's things developers can do to work better with pen testers, remember that in the shadow world, there is a reverse version of this talk called, working with developers as a pen tester. And it includes a whole bunch of advice for how pen testers can do their job better and work with developers, things like, remember that security testing isn't actually everyone's highest priority, even if it's yours. And remember that some features are actually more important than perfect security. But anyway, enough about the shadow talk, back onto the real talk. So it seems silly to define what a pen test is, but I think in the tech industry in general, terminology is often a source of miscommunication because the same words mean different things to different people. Samantha mentioned in her talk earlier about the difficulty of defining privacy. I've got a slightly easier task defining pen testing. So for me, pen testing is a type of test that follows a methodology, and the methodology looks something like this. So if something doesn't follow this complete methodology, so like, for example, if we're doing a threat and risk assessment on an application, it's important work. Threat modeling is a great, critically important task. Everyone should do more threat modeling. I love threat modeling. Just doing threat modeling is not a pen test. And by the same token, if you specialize in vulnerability research, super interesting. I love it. It's not pen testing. And pen testing is not vulnerability research. Same, despite some of the marketing materials coming out of certain bug bounty companies, like bug bounties are not pen testing and pen testing is not bug bounties. And the same thing for, simple activities like vulnerability scanning. This one in particular, it can be a little bit frustrating because there are organizations out there that will sell people a vuln scan and say, here's your pen test results. It's a bit of a challenge for our industry because it's not a pen test if you're not doing like the full activity. And thinking about this methodology, an interesting thing for me, at least, because I love nerding out about this sort of stuff, is that as you work from left to right throughout the methodology, you need humans more and more. So scripts and bots, or AI, if you're in marketing, are really good at doing discovery and enumeration. But as you get more and more towards the right, you really need more and more humans, because humans understand context, humans understand risk, humans understand other human factors, they know how to communicate better with other humans. So pen testing does require a human to do it. Like it, needs saying that you can't just have fully automated pen testing. And so who is this human that does it? Can I just hack my own stuff? The answer to can you hack your own stuff is yes, absolutely. Please hack your own stuff. Like, pen testers do not have a monopoly on security testing. They shouldn't have a monopoly on security testing. Anyone can hack stuff. Like, you don't have to wear a black hoodie. You don't have to work for a pen testing company. Everyone can hack everything that they have permission to hack. So if it's your own system, assumedly you do have permission to hack that. So yeah, absolutely do your own security testing. It's not really pen testing though, what you're doing though. Like it's security testing, but it's not a pen test. In fact, the person who builds the system is probably actually the worst person to pen test it, because you know about how you built it. So you have certain assumptions that you made as you built it, which means you're going to have really big blind spots about it. So really, this sort of testing should be done by someone other than the person who built it. Right, so pen test follows a methodology. It needs to be done by someone who specializes in it. Like, you can't just take any person with a tech background and throw a methodology in front of them and say, now pen test this. Like, you do need experience, training. And at least for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to say that a pen test is a sort of engagement-based activity, and that it's a project. It has a beginning, it has an end. Some people are interested in the concept of continuous pen testing. Is that a pen test? Is that sort of a different part of the AppSec program? You're sort of arguing semantics. I'm just going to dodge that question for today and move into why. Why would we want to do a pen test? Like, I've seen a whole bunch of different reasons that customers have had for why they do it. Many more than this. the most common one these days is that it's really hard to sell a product without having it pen tested. And what's interesting, there's a lot of talk in some of the earlier presentations about government legislation, and this one hasn't so much been pushed by government because business themselves have got a lot more serious about it. Like as part of good governance, if you're buying a SaaS, if you're going to pay for a SaaS services off a provider, you can say, can you show us your pen test report, please? And if they say, what? You're going to say, I'm going to go with another vendor. So it's sort of business to business compliance is driving a lot of testing and security, which in my mind is a good thing. All of these have one thing in common, and that is they're all about risk management, right? So what risk in particular? It's the risk that the system has vulnerabilities that you don't know about. Okay, so when would you not do a pen test? So like if you already know about vulnerabilities, you don't need someone else to tell you about it. Like you need to be working on fixing those. Another question we get sometimes is, hey, we've been hacked. We don't really know how it happens, but can you maybe do a pen test and figure out the vulnerability so we can fix it? And it's like, you don't need pen testers. You need incident responders. They're going to do a much better job of figuring it out. And if you think there's a chance that there's still people live in your environment, you don't need more attackers. You need fewer attackers. So you pen test when it makes sense to from a risk managed point of view. So what high risk scenarios like, I've never had a pen test done before. You don't have a security baseline. It's like you probably should do some testing. I'm about to release a new product. I'm about to release a new feature. It makes sense to have testing done to lower your risk there. All right. So you have established that you probably need to get a pen test. You need to know some things about yourself. So what is it that you're trying to test? Is like, this is a pretty easy question to answer. And obviously, the more stuff that's in scope, the more work it's going to take. I mean, that should be pretty obvious. Slightly less obvious question is like, exactly what about it? Do you want to know? Like, what are you trying to test? So like in InfoSec, we always talk about the CIA triad. Like that's the get out of jail free card. It's the obvious one. We want to test for these sort of things. Sometimes you want to test for your ability to detect and respond to attacks. Unknown unknowns, as old mate Rumsfeld called them, like where are the gaps? Like we think we've got everything secured, but like we don't know what we don't know. Or like I'm not actually sure what I'm trying to secure about this thing. And you know what? That's actually fine for an answer. Like if you don't know, like cool, you found a good question that you need to answer. And part of answering this is doing some basic threat modeling. Everyone seems a little bit scared of threat modeling. Like I think it's sold as this big complex activity. It doesn't have to be. So here's a mini talk. How to do threat modeling in 10 seconds. What are the bad things you want to avoid? Congratulations, you're doing threat modeling. Done. All right. If that was too fast, here's the 30-second version of it. What might be affected? Who might do it? How might they do it? Cool, you've done threat modeling. Okay, another thing to know about yourself is how mature is the target? And this requires like a little bit of honesty. Like everyone likes to think that their stuff is super cool and super high level. It's not always the case. Like how security focused are you? Like, and honestly, are you handling super ridiculously important data, or is it just, of medium importance? How risk averse or accepting are you? Like a lot of people seem to think, oh, we're very risk averse, we're focused on security. It's like, no, if you're a startup who, has another startup working on the same sort of idea, and the most important thing for you is to get product to market, like you're risk accepting. Like, I'm not saying ignore security, but it's not your number one priority. Do you have a baseline for the work? Do you have a blue team? Do you have people who are working in like detection and response? It's fine if you don't. Some organizations aren't big enough to justify having a blue team, but these are things that you need to know about yourself when you're trying to decide what's going to be the best way to engage and the best way to run pen tests. And who's going to do this pen test? So if you work for a big multinational, if you work for Google, for Microsoft, for Apple, if you work for like one of Australia's big four banks, you already have an answer to this question. Like, your pen test is going to be done by your internal pen test team. If you work for any organization that's smaller than those and doesn't have an internal pen testing capability, you're going to get an external partner to do it. And who are they? So if this talk was a sales pitch, this would be the bit where I'd do the sales pitch about my company. I'm not going to do that. That's fine. I will say, in the security industry in general, so this isn't just a pen testing problem, assessing the quality of security services is a hard problem. Like, tech is a pretty hot industry right now. Cybersecurity is a particularly hot area of the tech industry. There's a lot of money, and so there's a lot of people attracted to that money. It's hard to tell who's there selling snake oil. And I'm not going to be able to solve that problem for you today. But I will emphasize that when you're getting a pen test partner, this is a really high trust relationship. Like, the people who are performing pen tests for you are going to have the sort of access that you only give to the most trusted members of your own staff. So, someone who's going to become a domain admin of your Windows enterprise, someone who's might get root access to your AWS account. Think about that, and then think, how much do you want to know about the people who are doing this? Like, you probably don't want some Yahoo to be your next domain admin. But as I said, it's a hard problem to assess. Our industry has tried various different approaches to make it more transparent. There's different certifications for pen testers. Organizations have tried certifying organizations. Like, there's the CREST program. Without getting into it, none of them have been completely successful. There's problems with all of them, but I will give you one bit of advice that is pretty universal, in that if you want to know who's good, talk to your peers. Like, have you had pen testing done? Who did it? Were they good? What was your experience like? Most of the good pen testing firms in Australia and internationally trade on their reputation. Like, we do quality work, and our customers tell their peers that they do quality work, and that's what sort of keeps the ball rolling. But there are sharks out there. All right, so you can have a pen test done. You've sort of thought about who might do it, but the most important thing is working out the scope of the test. So if you Google a thing called the project management triple constraint, you'll find all these slightly different variations of the definition of the triple constraint. But they all seem to agree that the triple constraint comes down to cost, time, scope, and quality. These four things make up the triple constraint. So, ignoring the fact that project management makes no sense at all, time, scope, cost, quality, we can simplify this a little bit in this in a pen testing model, because when you're sort of working on a consultancy model, like whether they're internal pen testers, external pen testers, you typically have a day rate. So time is cost. That's simple. Quality is probably not that much of a variable, because if you say, hey, I just need a pen test for compliance purposes, can you just do a really bad job of it, please? Most pen testing companies will say no, because we put our name on the report and then you show that report to other people. And if it's later shown to be fraudulent, we look really bad. We get the bad reputation. We don't get follow-on work from anyone. So at least the reputable pen test companies will not do poor quality work. And we're not saying that, this is one of the areas where the perfect is the enemy of the good. Like, no no test is ever 100% complete. It's all done from a risk managed point of view. But quality doesn't really, hopefully, vary that much. So it pretty much comes down to scope is cost and cost is scope. So the more scope there is, the more it's going to cost. So getting that scope right is absolutely critical. Now, there's different types of penetration tests. We talk about white box testing, black box testing, red team. Red team is a relatively misunderstood term. There's this like perception amongst some people that like a red team is like a pen test, but better. And that's not really the case at all. So to better understand sort of the difference between some of these types of testing, thinking about target's knowledge of attack and attacker's knowledge of the target. So a red team, or at my work, we call them adversary simulations to try and help alleviate some of the misunderstandings. And red team or adversary simulation sits here. So it's very close to what would happen in the case of like real attackers. So target doesn't know they're being attacked, but also that you don't get any insider information. And like a white box pen test, which is where the testers get given as much information as possible about the environment to allow them to do the test, is sort of at the opposite end of the spectrum up here. And a lot of people ask, like real world attackers don't get the insider info. Like why would I give it to pen testers? Like, isn't that cheating? It's like, yeah, it's absolutely cheating. But if you come back to this methodology of everything that's included in a pen test, we've only got a certain amount of time to do all these activities. So if we can shrink the amount of time spent on these initial tasks, and if you spend less time doing discovery, it means you can spend more time doing vuln discovery. And that's one of the key differences between a pen test and a red team, is that with a pen test, you're trying to find as many vulnerabilities as possible in the time that you have. You're not trying to be like a real world attacker. Whereas with a red team, you are trying to be more like a real world attacker. You're trying to achieve a specific objective. So that might be, get access to the HR documents. It's like, cool, I might do that through phishing. I might do that through physically going inside an office. Might do it through, hacking your HR system. There's a whole bunch of different ways. And red teaming is all about chaining vulnerabilities together to achieve that objective. But you're not trying to find as many vulnerabilities as possible on a red team engagement. You're just trying to achieve the goal. Whereas with a pen test, you are trying to find as many vulnerabilities as possible. And so as a result, you don't work like a real world attacker. Like real world attackers need to be a bit stealthy. During a pen test, you're not trying to be stealthy. You're actually the opposite. You're being as noisy as possible. Like you should be showing up all over logs during a regular pen test. So this is the last slide about red teaming. It's good for certain types of engagements. It helps flush out those sort of unknown unknowns. And if one of your objectives is to test your internal blue team capability, red teams are what you want. But it's more expensive. It takes longer and you're going to find less vulnerabilities. So unless you have the maturity to be running a red team, it's not going to be the best value. And so an obvious follow-up question is like, can we get a bit of both? Can we do a sort of hybrid approach? The answer is, of course, the customer's always right. We can do a hybrid approach, but it's probably not a great idea to do it because you'll end up doing things like seeing if your blue team can detect if there were pen testers in your environment, which, like, who cares? You want your blue team to detect real type of attacks. There is another type of hybrid approach called a purple team, which is pretty much a red team, but the red team sits down next to the blue team and they go, okay, we did this. Did you detect it? Let's look at your logs together. Oh, cool, you found it in the logs. All right, now I'm going to do the next thing. Did it appear in your logs? And it's sort of the objective of a purple team is leveling up your blue team. Different type of hybrid approach. Purple team makes sense. Trying to do a hybrid between white box and red teaming doesn't make sense so much. Other things that we can adjust in the scope. What type of environment are we going to target for the test? Like target all your environments? Probably going to take too long. And there's no one size fits all answer to this. Like It makes most sense to test in prod a lot of the time, but there's always that risk that you might break something during a pen test and cause availability issues to prod. But on the other hand, real world attackers test in prod, and they test in test, and they test in dev. They'll try and target any of your environments. This is something you need to work through about what makes the most sense for your specific environment. And okay, what sort of authentication are we going to give the pen testers? So a really common misunderstanding is, hey, so the thing that we're most concerned about is an unauthenticated attacker can do bad things. So like, say you've got what should be a mainly read-only website. So, it's a brochureware website, it's a blog, something that where most of your users are unauthenticated. Does that mean that the type of testing that you should be doing and the type of access you should give to testers is just unauthenticated testing? And like intuitively, you'd say, yeah, but in reality, what you're really testing is, can unauthenticated users do things that authenticated users can? And the easiest way to test that is to give the testers access to an authenticated account, and then they can see if they can replicate that in an unauthenticated way. Otherwise, they're sort of like flailing around a little bit in the dark, trying to figure out what functionality is there that they might be able to access. So similar sort of thing when it comes to assessing what sort of roles you want to include in a pen test. Like you say, oh, look, we trust our admins, so we just want to test unprivileged users. It's like, no, but what you want to test is if your unprivileged users can perform privileged actions. So again, it makes sense to include admin roles if possible. Now, the number of roles that you test is going to have a huge impact on how much testing is actually required. It's like related to the handshake problem, like if you have 2 roles, 2 people is 1 handshake, 3 people is 3 handshakes. It goes up and up and up the more roles that you include. And so if you've got something like this is from like SAP. This is a matrix of like roles to users, and a security architect will say, oh, this is really good. This is nice, fine-grained principle of least privilege applied. And a tester will look at this and go like, oh my God, like you want me to test all of these? Like this will take me a year. So at the end of the day, you need to make a risk-based decision on what makes sense to test in terms of roles. Pick the most commonly used roles and go with them is usually the approach that you go with. Similar to roles is like the interfaces of your app. So like you've got a user-facing interface. Some apps will have the admins log into the same interface. Other apps will have like a totally separate out-of-band admin interface. Like, do we want to test that as well? Yeah, you probably will. Like, fewer people use it, but this is the high-risk part of the app, and this is where a lot of people get popped. And people think, cool, this is our whole application, the user-facing interface and optionally the admin-facing interface. It's like, did you forget about this little guy? Because a lot of people don't consider this in scope for when they're testing systems. And when your infrastructure is in the cloud, that means potentially other people can access that. If you've misconfigured anything in your cloud environment, if you've got open S3 buckets, if you've got roles not right, guess what? You'll get hacked just the same as if you got hacked through the front door of your web app. The good news for testing cloud environments is because they're all the same, it's relatively efficient to test cloud environments these days. Your web app's got a WAF in front of it. Should you test with the WAF? It's like the WAF is there to slow attackers down. In the real world, you want to slow bad guys down. You don't want to slow pen testers down. The best way to approach it with WAFs is disable it for the testers' IP addresses. If you want to know if the WAF was being effective, if they've found issues, get them to retest those issues again with the WAF present. All right. We've got the engagement. We're getting ready to start. Best thing to do is talk it up. Like, we need to communicate. There's some really obvious things that we're going to talk about. So like pen testers are going to tell you the source IP addresses. the people being tested are going to provide credentials to the testers and some documentation. But some less obvious stuff is like doing proper introductions. So like, don't just say, this is Alice, this is Bob, they work on the team. It's like, this is Bob, he's the project manager, he's responsible for the project schedule. Like if something's going to affect the project schedule, tell Bob. This is Alice, she wrote the API. She's your technical contact for questions about the API. Have a comms plan. If we find a vulnerability, how are you going to tell us about it? How do you want to know? And then during the engagement, follow that story. A great thing is if you can get testers embedded into your work Slack or Teams, like whatever you're using internally, talk it up. Keep change to a minimum during the test. Like try not to keep changing things while people are testing it. If someone reports a vulnerability during the engagement, that's actually a pretty high risk scenario because they've told you about it early, so you can fix it early, but it also means that you haven't had any risk analysis done. So keep talking to the pen tester. Say, hey, so thanks for reporting that. This is the fix we were thinking about. Will that work? Have you got any other advice? Like, keep the communication open. Post-engagement, if people, like we often offer people a follow-up meeting, take the pen testers up on the meeting. If there's anything you're not sure about, again, we're thinking about addressing this issue. What do you think about this approach? So in summary, the key themes, I guess, from all this is this is all about the relationship between developers and pen testers, and the keys to any good relationship are open, clear communication. Pen testers only pretend to be bad guys. We're not actually bad guys. We're actually on your side. So we like to work with you. We're not working against you. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm amazed how well you sped up at the end there without losing too much. That was pretty good work.
Thank you.
There are a couple questions for you, so I'll get them across to you for answering in the chat. And we'll be back in about a little under 15 minutes at 3 o'clock Australian Eastern Time with our next talk.